Once the site was chosen, the next question was, what do we build it from? There were no deliveries of lumber, no bricks ordered by the thousand. Everything came from the land, and every choice mattered. In forested regions, timber became the backbone of most homes. In open fields, people turned to mud, straw, and stone. Clay was dug from riverbanks and shaped by hand. Straw was collected after the harvest and dried in the sun. If there were stones in the fields, they were carried one by one and stacked without mortar, often relying on careful balancing and gravity alone. In some places, peat or turf was cut and used like bricks. This was construction without plans. No rulers, no pencils, no pre-cut beams. Just knowledge passed down through generations. A grandfather showing a child how to notch wood. A mother teaching her daughter how to mix mud with just enough straw. There was no formal schooling, but everyone was a builder by necessity. Children helped collect twigs. Grandparents packed clay. Neighbors raised walls together. A home wasn't built alone. It was raised as a community, often over days or weeks, depending on the weather and how many hands could be spared from the fields. Materials weren't just chosen for availability, they were chosen for survival. Thatch was warm, yes, but also a fire hazard. Wood rotted but was easier to repair. Stone lasted longer but was heavy and hard to shape. Every wall told a story about the environment. Sandy soil meant lighter walls. Damp regions demanded stone foundations. The climate shaped the home as much as the people who lived in it. And when the house was finally ready, it was never finished. Homes were patched, altered, added to. They evolved alongside the family that lived inside. Even the act of clearing land was a massive undertaking. Trees were chopped down with axes that dulled quickly. Roots were pulled from the soil by hand or with the help of animals. The ground was leveled with shovels and muscle. In places where tools were scarce, fire was used just to clear stumps or harden clay. It was slow, exhausting work, but when the land was finally cleared and ready, it wasn't just space for a house. It was claimed territory, a foundation not just for a home, but for generations to come. When we imagine building a home today, we picture machines, cranes, contractors, and concrete. For the peasant, it was a different kind of construction, one powered by sweat, instinct, and tradition. One of the most widespread building methods was wattle and daub. First, they would drive sturdy stakes vertically into the ground to form the skeleton of a wall. Then they wove thinner branches between the stakes like a basket, creating a lattice called the wattle. The final step was smearing this with daub, a thick mixture of clay, mud, straw, animal dung, and sometimes even blood or hair to help it bind. It was messy, smelly, and deeply effective. The daub was packed by hand, sometimes by barefoot children, stomping it into place, pressing it into the weave until every crack was sealed. Once dried by the sun, it formed a surprisingly durable wall, weather-resistant, windproof, and insulating. In some regions, homes were made entirely of cob, a similar mixture shaped into massive lumps and stacked like bricks. Others used rammed earth, pounding soil between wooden forms until it hardened into solid walls. In coastal areas, seaweed or reeds were mixed into walls. In mountainous places, stone was everything, collected, stacked, and sealed with mud or lime. The roof was perhaps the most vital element. A poorly built roof meant damp winters, collapsing beams, and endless repairs. Thatched roofing was the norm. Straw, reeds, or heather, tied in bundles, and layered thick on wooden rafters. The angle was steep, so rain and snow could slide off. But thatch didn't last forever. Every 5 to 10 years, it needed to be replaced, and it often became home to birds, insects, or worse, rats. There was always smoke from the hearth, rising up through the thatch and blackening the beams above. Without chimneys, the roof acted like a filter, slowly clogging with soot. Wooden beams were hand-carved with axes and fitted without nails. Instead, wooden pegs were driven through carefully shaped joints. These techniques weren't just practical, they were beautiful. Even today, centuries-old timber-framed houses still stand. Doors were thick planks, hammered together with iron nails if the family could afford them. Windows were tiny, sometimes just holes, sometimes covered with oiled cloth or animal skin to keep out the wind. Glass was almost unheard of. The walls breathed, the floors shifted with the seasons, and every storm tested the builder's choices. Every stage of the build had to be timed with the seasons. Mud had to dry in the sun. Thatch couldn't be laid in the rain. Wood had to be cured, not fresh cut. A poorly timed storm could wash away days of work. Tools were basic: axes, hammers, wooden mallets, crude saws. And yet, homes rose from the ground year after year. Not to mansions, not fortresses, just shelters, warm enough to sleep, dry enough to survive, strong enough to outlast the storm. And that was enough. The outside of a peasant's house may have looked rough, but the inside was where life truly happened. There was no insulation, no wallpaper, no glass chandeliers, but there was warmth, noise, and the smell of earth, fire, and life. The floor was packed dirt, sometimes layered with rushes or straw, to soften the impact and soak up spills. Walls were bare or whitewashed with lime if the family could afford it. Light came from a single fire or a small oil lamp. At night, everything became shadow. In the center of the room stood the hearth, the fire that never went out. It was used for cooking, heating, drying clothes, keeping animals warm, and even for lighting. The smoke rose through a hole in the roof or simply filled the room and drifted out through gaps in the walls. This made the air thick, and the ceilings black with soot. But the hearth was sacred, a place of warmth, food, and family. Around it, people gathered, told stories, sharpened tools, and shared whatever bread or soup the day had earned. Furniture was minimal: a rough-hewn table, a bench, maybe one bed for everyone, with straw-filled mattresses. Wealthier peasants might own a chest or a stool. Clothing hung from pegs. Tools rested in corners. There was no separation between rooms. The entire family lived, worked, and slept in the same space. In winter, animals were often brought inside, not just to protect them from the cold, but to warm the home with their body heat. A cow in the kitchen might sound strange today, but to a peasant it was practical. Everything inside the home was handmade or repurposed. Clay pots from a local potter, spoons carved from wood, blankets woven from wool. Walls sometimes held herbs for medicine, dried meats, or bundles of garlic to keep away sickness. Shoes rested by the fire, trying to dry before another day of mud. Life was hard, but the home was a place of rest, even if that rest was brief and interrupted by hunger, chores, or crying children. In the end, a peasant's home was never just shelter. It was a fortress against cold, a nursery for children, a workshop, a place of love, and sometimes loss. Built by hands that bled and backs that ached, these homes stood not because they were perfect, but because the people inside refused to fall. They didn't have architects, They had instinct, tradition, and each other. And that was enough to turn sticks and mud into something sacred, a home.